Hello and welcome to the Grow Places podcast, where we explore the virtuous circle of people, growth and place. Brought to you by Grow Places and hosted by our founder, Tom Larsson.
Pip, thank you very much for joining me today on the Grow Places podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you.
Good.
Yeah.
And I know you're very busy at the moment with everything going on here at the Barbican, but it's fascinating to have this conversation with you. So thanks for your time.
Oh, thank you. No, it is wild at the moment, but all good things. Yeah.
Good. And so before we get into all of that, why don't you just a little introduction to yourself, please?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'm Pip Simpson. I'm Director for Buildings and Renewal at the Barbican Centre. And I joined about a year ago. And previous to that, I was working at the V&A Museum as their Director for Design, Estate and Public Programme, which is kind of a similar-ish role looking at capital development of a cultural building and the kind of activities that take place within it. Before that, Royal Museums Greenwich and Tate, so I have a big old sort of big beast cultural organisation background, I guess.
Yeah, amazing. And so, as everyone will know, the names that you've mentioned there, they're some of the leading cultural institutions in the UK. And so it's going to be amazing to get your take on culture, those institutions, how they develop and what they do for people and for cities. So,
brilliant.
Yeah. Maybe what do you think to that? Do you have a feel more broadly before we dive into the Barbican?
It's one of the most enormous questions.
Yeah.
So what they do for the city, I mean, where to start? I think actually the big nationals, the kind of Tates and the V&As and, Natural History Museum, all those sort of really sort of enormous institutions, it's interesting because they operate on a very local and a national and an international basis. So the ripple effect of everything they do is so enormous, and it's not just about sort of how they impact people living within the city, which they do, but actually they sort of tone set for other cultural organisations. So they become the kind of field leaders, which is interesting, and they play quite an important political role as well. Actually, I mean, particularly in work internationally, they tour a lot of exhibitions, and this kind of they're often a route for soft power and relationships between different countries. So, I mean, it's quite an interesting, complex environment to operate in, I would say. I think in terms of placemaking, I mean, South Kensington was an interesting place to be because it was really conceived as a hub of knowledge, I suppose, arts and science coming together, somewhere that kind of draws people in, as kind of gravitational pull. There's some brilliant statistic about, I think there's as many visitors there per year as to Venice or something. It's really sort of significant for London, and yet strangely slightly out of the centre. That's the other thing about London. Where is that centre, I suppose? But in any case, it's it kind of creates its own hub, and so I suppose it's something about that sort of it draws people in from outside. But actually, when you talk to anyone who lives in London, they do see it as their own personal resource in a funny way. And it's also about, I could do this for hours. It's also about talent and skill generation, of course, because it's also the place where, and I'm happy to say it transparently, the arts are now not taught in schools as much as once they were, and the opportunities aren't really there to engage with creative subjects in the way that actually even when I was at school was possible. And so actually often these places are supplementing that and becoming a first point of contact or exposure for younger generations, and are really feeding that pipeline of talent, which is not just about people going into work in the creative industries, but actually skills that are needed across every kind of work and discipline, even financing. Everything now demands creative lateral thought. And actually, where is that really being nurtured? So, I will stop there because I could do this for days, but that's, I suppose, where I kind of see them having real impact.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And cities more broadly are kind of engines of kind of humanity, creativity, growth, and a cultural institution within that are so important, aren't they? Those anchor institutions, not just for the place, for its status, but also for that local sense of kind of wealth and amenity as well. And so how have you seen, obviously being on the inside of various organisations over your career, maybe how those organisations kind of take that role? How do they see themselves, like obviously inwardly, but also maybe outwardly within their neighbourhoods in the city?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point. And I think it's shifted in any case over the course of my career, which I suppose is like loosely 20 years now, a bit more, which is terrifying. But I think when I first started working in the big nationals, It was very much an international outlook, and it was a very particular moment in the early 2000s, and it was a kind of, just about still on the new Labour wave, and everyone feeling very, very confident about, Cool Britannia and all the rest of it. So their role then felt like it was, there was a real confidence, actually. And I think what's come through more powerfully over the last, I would say, sort of 10 to 15 years is actually more to your point around maybe community building and engaging with audiences and understanding actually, where you really can have a more direct, perhaps almost personal impact and influence. And I think one of the things that's come out, and again, kind of even more recently, that I've seen, and actually some of this came out through some of the work that I did with Young V&A in Bethnal Green, which is understanding these buildings as places of social encounter, if you like. So we're in this kind of increasingly fractured society, and I think we all get that. But actually, these sorts of organisations are places where they belong to everyone. We live in this incredibly lucky place where actually the majority are free to wander into. And actually, it is one of the few places where you will meet people that you might not otherwise come across. And different programming can allow that to happen in different ways. But actually, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later as well, the kinds of spaces that you provide can help that and support that to happen in a really quite sort of nuanced and organic way. And so this idea of it being, as you say, it's kind of a glue that holds cities together is actually more and more pronounced, I think.
Mm. Yeah, because as you're touching on there, some of that is physical, isn't it? About how are the places designed, how active the street frontages are, and how welcoming it feels.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that is actually not to do with the physical, it's more programming, it's attitude, it's kind of how open are programs of events or how accessible are they. And so maybe now specifically with regards to the Barbican then, because, it is one of my favourite places to go. I love going out, sitting and having my lunch by the lake and looking at the fish, and it's incredible. And it is this little oasis in the centre of the city. And that's all the kind of positive side of the public realm and the other things. But it also does suffer a little bit from that kind of post-war idea of this kind of sort of utopian dream within the city that is quite closed in a lot of respects to the kind of surrounding streets and a network and the level changes and everything. So that's my kind of sort of maybe critique and also celebration of the Barbican as a kind of citizen, as opposed to someone who lives here or kind of works here. But I don't know what your take on it is as a place, maybe having, as you say, been a Londoner and now working here.
Yeah, I mean, oh gosh, yeah, it's one of my favourite subjects to talk about. I mean, it's the best place on earth, obviously. And I came here because it's the place that I love most in London. And it hasn't disappointed, I'll be honest. Like, you still get a kick every day, I tell you, even a year in. So it is amazing. I mean, maybe just step back then to your kind of initial point about, its genesis and what that means in terms of how it works for people, and then that sort of inheritance and how we're trying to kind of work within that. I think you're right. I mean, that sort of that post-war utopian ideal and ambition is really, it can be both incredibly energizing and inspiring, but it's also quite, it can feel a bit alienating at times, I guess. I think one thing I would say is that spirit of boldness and hope and optimism is something that we really hold dear. And that's something which we thread through all of the work that we do here. And I think that's about the building and the programme and actually just the spirit of place. And I have a very firm, slightly kind of maybe superstitious belief in the way in which a building is made is often the way in which it's experienced and lived in for the rest of its life, actually. That's kind of set quite fundamentally. And you do feel that here, and I do think there is that kind of, and that's why it's so incredible, as you say, you walk in and it's like you're held in someone else's dreamscape. It's amazing. But of course, it was part of a much bigger plan with the highways and the pedways, high walks and pedways kind of going out into the city, and this idea of a kind of web or a network across the whole, which was never complete. So now it's in glorious isolation as a kind of fortress island with roads going nowhere at high level. And a wall all around it, pretty much. So it kind of doesn't show, as you say, it doesn't show its face to you at all. And the question of thresholds and how thresholds work and how you kind of help to make them more porous is probably one of the biggest challenges we have. I mean, it's like a cliche to say that everyone gets lost at the Barbican. Everyone knows that. You haven't been to the Barbican unless you've been lost. So it's, there is a beauty in that as well. There is this idea of like the unexpected encounter. But actually, if you're someone who feels that arts and culture isn't for them, or has any kind of spatial anxiety, or indeed any barriers to access of any sort, physical or neurological or anything, it is incredibly challenging. So I guess my feeling on it is, how do you hold in the one hand that same spirit of of place, and I don't want to over open it. It feels magic to be within, and yet make people feel very comfortable to kind of cross over and to explore. So a lot of the work that we're doing is about wayfinding. We'll talk about that separately perhaps because it's huge, but also about when you do get to the space, and this is the bit that really fascinates me, making it feel permissive enough that people still will come and do what you do, which is sit and have lunch, or come and work on the laptop, or come and do their dance class or their crafting, which they do now very comfortably. But then sort of take it back to that sort of what one of our heritage architects calls glamour for the people. It's become very run down, and actually somehow striking that balance between beauty and comfort or welcome is really significant, I think.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And because you touched on there, and maybe we should, just for people who don't really know the Barbican as well as we do, just touch on it. But it's very mixed use, as we would talk about in our industry. It's not just one thing. It's housing, it's schools, it's culture. So maybe just for the listeners, sort of kind of elaborate on that a little bit, and then maybe also just quite interestingly, how close to the original vision do you feel like we are today in that context, and maybe with regards to your plans moving forwards?
That's a really interesting question. So a little bit about the kind of the madness of the mixed-use complex. So Barbican started as a residential plan, effectively, so on a bomb site from the Second World War. And it's interesting to note, actually, originally I think there was something in the region of 45 households on this site. There are now something in the region of 2,500, so 4,000 residents total across the estate, which accounts for half of the 8,000 that live in the square mile. So it's we are not a very residential area in general, but most of them are at the Barbican. And then within that, and this fascinates me, I think this recognition that at the heart of a new community, you put culture and you put social civic spaces, and I should be absolutely clear here, the residential was not conceived as social housing. It was always aspirational. It was always for the professionals working in the city, and I think there's sometimes a kind of slight misunderstanding around that. It was something that they wanted people to aim for. So I say, very bold, very confident in its outlook, and very kind of one vision, and you really feel that, and you will have felt that across the site. So it has that, and then at the heart of it is we've got Guildhall School of Music and Drama, I should say, who are our brilliant neighbours. So you've got that kind of arts education piece sitting within, and then the Barbican Arts Centre, which is kind of carved out of what's left after the resi was finished. So we're stacked up on kind of 6 or 7 levels, interconnected in lots of complicated ways. Currently, everything leaks into everything, and it's all concrete, so everything reverberates around everywhere, and carved around the tube lines. And I mean, it is, as a piece of engineering, exquisite and incredible. And then in terms of its use, what have we got? We've got huge amounts of open civic space in our foyers, in our lakeside. We've got a whole stack of restaurants and cafes. But more excitingly, we have 2 theatres, an enormous concert hall, 3 cinemas, 2 art galleries, a lot of programming in all of our spaces of all the different art forms, and the world's best conservatory. So it's a pretty complicated building to look after, and to develop. So your second question was, how close are we now to that vision?
Yeah. And where do you go next?
Where do you go next? It's kind of, I suppose, exactly the question that we've been trying to answer the last kind of couple of years. I think we had probably lost that vision a bit. And I think there is also, it is a really unusual context to operate in. It's how much are we here for our local neighbours and residents and community, which of course, we are at the heart of, and they are, some of our greatest supporters and advocates. But also how much are we here for London and internationally? And to my mind, that's sort of where the interest lies. It's like, actually, how can we open up to become more of a London hub and centre? How do we work more cleverly across? I mean, we work with 80 countries every year. Our programme is hugely international, but we actually don't welcome as many international visitors as many of the big players that I've worked with before. How do we develop that so that we become somewhere that is really about discourse and dialogue? I think one of the things that I think we do still have from the start is this kind of, how would I describe it? The Barbican always felt, both in its architecture and its programme, like a bit of an agitator and a bit of a provocateur. It was always very, very progressive in its thinking, forward-looking. I don't think we've lost that. I think there is that kind of spirit of, you know, we can kind of be rooted in the most historic part of the city and still look forward. There is a lovely, lovely thing that happens during the day here where, you know, you encounter an audience for the London Symphony Orchestra, our resident orchestra, and then turn, you know, 2 seconds away and, you know, people coming in to see, I don't know, Jockstrap or whatever. The theatre programme is so, everything is so varied, you know. We literally cover everything. And so the feel of the place changes minute by minute because the audience is changing. And I think that was always I think that for me is what the future should look like. I want it to be that. It's that kind of vitality of that constant shifting. It's like watching light changing during the day. You know, really the mood is different all the time. That was a bit of a big esoteric kind of conceptual answer, wasn't it, to the future of the Barbican? But that's sort of, in terms of my sensibility for it, that's where I'd like it to be.
Yeah. Well, it isn't. I think that, you know, that you know, clear vision is the most important thing, I think, in any project. And as you say, this is probably is one of the, you know, the clearest visions for a place, I think, that there's been. And the fact that it was ever delivered, I appreciate, as you say, the network of sort of flying walkways and everything only went so far. But even what's been built is remarkable, really. That it's just a thing of scale.
Yeah.
And as you say, I do really feel like it embodies that essence and that spirit. And so how do you see that then maybe, you know, moving forward, the work that you're doing here and how do you actually go about a big capital project that is for a kind of national treasure like this?
It's a really, I think you're right, that sort of consistency across the whole is really actually quite a hard thing to hold. And in all the buildings that I've worked in before, they've already been through many, many rounds of adaptation and change because of, you know, just different demand of audiences or different technology or whatever it is. So Victorian buildings are kind of, and also because they're often built cumulatively anyway, do you know what I mean? It's sort of piecemeal, and so they have that kind of ability to slightly kind of flex and change and absorb. You really don't get that here, I'll be honest. It is very unilateral. And I think what's been interesting is, firstly, how do you deal with a building that really just does tell you that this is what it is? And even when you put bits in, it's really obvious that they weren't there in the first place. And so there's a bit of stripping back to this skeleton of it and really understanding it just as this, you know, beautiful, wonderful, singular thing. But there's also this duty of care, I suppose, which is around, we're at this absolutely pivotal moment of it's finally being understood as an icon. And really, I would say probably now universally accepted as such. And it's been obviously quite... has been controversial and not always loved. But I think that's landed. But you're picking it up right at that point and trying to adapt it for future use and make sure that, you know, it actually has meaning and relevance for future generations and doesn't become a fossil and remains vital. So we're walking this tightrope in a way that I've never really experienced before, where it's like you somehow have to kind of celebrate it and be pushing it at the same time. So it's a really, really delicate, it's like kind of scalpel-like interventions, which has been really interesting for me and a huge professional development, I have to say. So there's a bit of that. I think having really clear, so I feel our vision for it is very clear and it is very, very much audience-led. So what do our audiences need and how can we surprise them when that's right, kind of thing, and drive that change ourselves. And so we've done a huge amount of co-design. We've worked with 16 to 30-year-olds. We've had a huge amount of public consultation, actually, around the whole project. So it's been led by that. But our real sort of foundation, I suppose, is in our values, which are about inclusivity and sustainability. And, you know, that commitment to making sure that we have real social value and we encourage people to kind of come with empathetic minds and encounter something unexpected. So they've been the drivers. And so the really big physical changes have all been sort of around that. So how do we enable access for all? And not just kind of access, but actually brilliant access for all. And how do we make sure that we are operating in a way that is responsible, that's green, and that is also agile, so that we can flex with different needs and flex to different kind of uses. So a lot of that is just infrastructure. A lot of that is actually the hidden stuff, which is great. But some of it does take a bit of, you know, it wasn't a sympathetic building. That's not how it was. That's not how it's conceived. So you have to kind of almost inject that back. But that can be done in interesting ways, in exciting ways. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so you know, you've got two obviously passionate supporters of the Barbican here, as you can hear. But if you went and spoke to your, I don't know, your head curator or your restaurateur or one of your residents or a teacher in the school, how do you think they would feel about the Barbican as a kind of actually living, working, operating within it, as opposed to this kind of concept or idea?
Everyone loves it. I will say that. And I have never worked anywhere with as much passion or love in it as I have here. And it is extraordinarily positive and energetic as a place to be. So the first thing I would say is that everybody who's chosen to work here has done so for the love of place. And, you know, that goes across everywhere. It's our engineers, it's our, you know, arts teams, even our finance team, like everybody loves it as a place. Everybody is also, I mean, it's almost a kind of a running joke. I mean, it is an incredibly difficult building to be in. It's really cold most of the time. It's really poorly insulated. And it's, you know, a lot of concrete, so it doesn't really ever warm up. Things break constantly. The infrastructure's shot. It's been, I'll be honest, like not brilliantly maintained all the way through. And also it's end of life, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's middle-aged, let's say. So, you know, it needs a lot of love and care. But it's interesting that even with all of that, you can't help but see the potential of it still. Like, it's still a really inspiring place to be. And it's, like you say, it's that sort of, you come in and you're held, you do kind of feel like you're stepping into a different world every day. So I think, in general, you'd get a positive response, but there'll always be a complaint about the toilets. You know?
The toilets.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And if people stop complaining, I mean, how will they know they're here? You know?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
And so why do you personally then feel so passionate about this? What buttons does it press for you as a person and your passions, and why do you feel so at home and excited by being here in this project?
I think it's a range of things, actually. I mean, obviously, architecturally, I love it. I think it's because it covers everything. You can do anything here. Like, the opportunity is endless because we could pretty much absorb any kind of arts programming. You know, we cover all the disciplines, every kind, and that we are. I think I've never worked anywhere where I could say so genuinely we have something for everyone. I mean, you know, really do. And it's not just our arts program, it's our commercial events as well, you know, and you do have the graduations and you have the kind of different corporates coming through, but actually it's what I was saying before, that life and that shift and that sort of tonality is amazing. I think the other side of it for me, which is totally unexpected and was a sharp learning curve, is that when I joined, you know, I thought I was joining the Barbican Centre, and actually, as we all do, we all work for the City of London Corporation, which is our owner and funder, and indeed supporting this big capital redevelopment as well. And at first that seemed really alien to me. I've always worked for cultural organisations, and I was like, well, I never really wanted to be part of a kind of local authority, not a standard local authority, but, you know, you get my point. And actually what's beautiful about that, and what I have found particularly in the last kind of 6 months, is the opportunity it affords to understand your work in a bigger context. So actually, you know, what we do contribute not only to the Square Mile but London more broadly, and actually working for for a corporation that's both quite archaic and ritualistic. I mean, it is, you know, over 1,000 years old, but also quite progressive in its thinking. And that span across, you know, it might be here, but I might be talking to colleagues at Tower Bridge, or I might be talking to colleagues at Smithfield Market, or the New London Museum, or, you know, St Paul's. What a variety of, I mean, you can think of a greater variety in 1 square mile, you know, just the richness of that is mind-blowing. So I now have, you know, 4,000 colleagues, all from different areas of expertise and disciplines, and, you know, the latitude that gives you to really genuinely sort of shift the landscape is totally thrilling. And it did take me a while to recognise it, I will be honest, because when you first join, you're kind of like, you know, that's huge. And it's not always the most kind of easy place to navigate. But once you know how, and once you've really met the people, absolutely extraordinary. So yeah, all exciting, really.
Yeah. I'm definitely getting the feeling from you, Pip, that you really enjoy that kind of, that sense of actually doing things that have an impact, and not that you're a kind of progress, you know, you're kind of pushing forwards, whether that's cultural change or whether that's the projects from a kind of technical perspective. And these types of capital projects, as I well know, you know, working with big institutions in the past, they need that figurehead of a project, of an organisation that kind of can pull in all the disparate strands and go and speak to everyone that they need to speak to. and then actually kind of grab it by the horn, so to speak, and really drive it forwards. And that feels like it's kind of you're sort of relishing that challenge as well.
Oh, I love that side of it. I do. I mean, it's probably on this one more than anything. It's a kind of I was going to say a political job, but not really that. But it's something about rallying the troops, I guess, as much as anything, and getting the support, because it's such a it's such a huge project, and sort of it covers the whole of the site, and there's a lot of love out there for this place. So there's a lot of people who have an interest in what you're doing. But yeah, I think you're right. I think sort of galvanising and motivating. I've probably spent less time looking at designs on this job than I have on any other, because it is very much more about that sort of strategic leadership across it. But yeah, no, I do. I really love that. I mean, it's always a people story, isn't it? You basically, and certainly that's for me, where the interest lies, and it's very relational. And I'm not really, I'll probably get my knuckles wrapped for this potentially, but it's like, I don't think you can actually deliver major projects or major change through rigid process. You only ever do it through people's passion and collaboration, and so that sort of building of a good dynamic among the right people, and getting people to think much more broadly about what they're doing and not just stick in their own little disciplines. I think where it's
I completely
right?
agree. I completely agree. And it's we're talking about culture and institutions, but that is the culture of a project. Like, that's the culture of a way that things get done, and I completely agree with you. I think that's fundamental. And so then for anyone who maybe isn't fully aware of what the plans are, and maybe you don't necessarily need to go into too much detail, but anything that you could say, maybe you could frame it in, okay, if people were to come here in 5 years or something, what would be different? Like, what's this kind of body of work? You mentioned wayfinding and a few other things, but what's that actually kind of mean in terms of this capital project?
Yeah, no, okay, so this next 5 years, I should say, so we have a master plan for the whole of the site, and also some decommissioned space that we also have, which is a bit of a longer term plan. This first 5 years, the easiest way to define what we're doing is that we are touching every part of the site that sits this side of the paywall, if you like. So everywhere that you can go without getting a ticket. So all of the free public civic spaces, the foyers, the lakeside, the catering areas, the restaurants and cafes, and the conservatory, which is, the proper, it's one of my favourite spaces in the world, honestly. So if I had to define what we're doing, and it's slightly different in each of those areas, if I'm truthful, but it is both a restoration and a revitalisation project. So we're looking at making sure that the architectural heritage is celebrated, but that actually it's become something which, as we were saying before, it sort of has resonance, I suppose, with contemporary audiences, and it allows us to work way more flexibly into those spaces. So something we really struggle with at the moment is people coming in and not immediately really understanding where they are or what's going on. So being able to bring the programme out into those areas, also because it allows a free first encounter for people who maybe can't afford a ticket now, but it kind of generates an interest which, when they are earning or they move, then they can come and see the kind of broader programme. So, and that's in both the foyers and the outside spaces and the conservatory. The conservatory is an interesting one. I'm just going to give you a bit of a kind of history of it, because it's the drivers there are quite unique. In that it is built on top of our theatre and around the fly tower for the theatre, and obviously it's a place with a lot of water involved and is leaking into all of those spaces, and also glass filling. I mean, that is a really big job of restoration and reimagining, I would say. So lifting the whole thing up and basically putting it back down again, which allows us to put in place access to all areas, which is great. It's not currently possible for anyone in a wheelchair or less ambulant. And at the moment it's shut 90% of the time, because we use it for events, and actually by some really sort of neat interventions and compartmentalising within the space, we can now open it to the public 7 days a week. So that point of open access and a sort of gesture of generosity, I suppose you could say, towards the city, I think really, really fundamental. So that's a lot of that. Fixing loads of toilets, doing lots of work to the plant room, making sure the lights come on, LED lighting, all the rest of it, fixing the envelope, doing the glazing. So all the stuff you'd expect to keep a building going that otherwise, truthfully, would probably be closing in the next kind of 10, 15 years. So there's a lot of that. It's also about making people feel more comfortable in the space. So better furniture, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of kind of just touch and feel stuff, which helps people kind of feel that it belongs to them and they're at ease. and wayfinding, which is actually what I'm hoping will be on my headstone if we do crack this. It is honestly the most difficult job in London, but we've just appointed a team, and frustratingly I can't tell you who they are, but just appointed a design team to work with us on an entirely new wayfinding scheme across the whole building. Many have tried before. We currently live with about 4 different concurrent schemes, which is not helping, to clarify. And also, of course, we sit within broader kind of legible London schemes and TfL and all the rest of it. But the idea for me, and I've used this phrase a lot, which is to kind of create an easy route from tube to toilet, because what you want to do is get everybody quickly to the places they need to get to. We have this kind of really interesting, some people want to get lost, and some people actually kind of loosely want to know where they're going to go, but they're fine to just sit. But you also have the people with the time ticket who need to get to the show. So you're trying to hold all those people at once and make them feel comfortable. So that's going to be rolling out over the next kind of couple of years, and to see us through the period of construction, so it can be flexible and help people while we're closing different bits of the building. But then we'll take its kind of permanent form at the end of the 5 years. That's the plan.
Amazing.
Yeah.
No, it's
exciting.
Yeah, no, really good to see. Good to see it all moving forwards, and so you touched on a bit earlier the City of London, and obviously that's where you're located, and the broader sort of cultural mile strategy and the City of Culture, kind of strategy that they're promoting. So you got the Museum of London's moving to Smithfield, and the work that you're doing here. So how do you see the Barbican kind of fitting within that? You mentioned some of those kind of conversations and partnerships you have going.
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely a kind of fabric, across the whole of the city that knits together. And we're on this kind of key axis, I suppose you would call it cultural mile, but I kind of like to think of it as a cross, if you like. So it kind of runs from Smithfield down past, and we've got the new Elizabeth line, brilliant, down past Farringdon, through Beach Street, which is the kind of tunnel road that a lot of people know that runs alongside the Barbican, to us, but also down, to St Paul's and theoretically across the bridge to Tate Modern. I mean, there's this, wealth of hidden gems and kind of creative life, and fabric nightclub. I mean, there's all these different venues that kind of speak to each other, but at times can feel a bit fragmented. But I do think with the London Museum opening, that's again this kind of huge draw, something which people really feel is for them, and a free offer right in the heart of the square mile. So the dialogue between all of this to me is, it should be not cannibalistic, if you like we're not stealing audiences from each other. It's just the more that people come in, the more it cross-fertilises, and the more complementary we become, much greater than the sum of our parts, because that's how these places work. It's like South Kent, actually, go back to that example, or even Stratford, the what was originally called Olympicopolis, the East Bank. People do... this is the way people's minds work. You don't just go to see one thing. You go to maybe see a thing and eat a thing and meet a friend and then go on to something in the evening. And, so I think it's about sort of just understanding ourselves relationally in that respect. And, Destination City, which is the city's initiative to become a creative hub. And it kind of intersects with the GLA's broader plans for London and, as a kind of, I guess, talent engine generator, whatever you want to call it. One of the things that I think moving forward would be really interesting is, where do you find those spaces for less formal creative activity? So we have the most wonderful theatre. I mean, we literally have the most wonderful theatre, I think, in the world. Great, but it's enormous. So unless you're doing a huge production, you're rattling around, We don't have any rehearsal spaces, zero. So we're not producing, or we can't really be a producing house. And no one in the vicinity does have that function. And there are no, as everybody knows, or most people know, small or medium-sized kind of gig spaces left in London. They're all closing down. So it's those sorts of platforms for emerging talent, the smaller places, or the ones that are a bit more kind of scratch, where you can start bringing people in. London Museum's doing it interestingly. They do have some studio spaces that they're going to be sort of bringing to life, which is great. But it's a very particular context. Is that how do we allow that to kind of develop and grow so that we've got the actual feeder? Because at the moment we're just a big beast, and we're kind of waiting for people to get to a certain level before they can come here. So I guess that's how I see it. I think if we create that sort of nexus, then actually that infrastructure then will start to kind of grow around as well, and that's when it becomes really, really exciting.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as you say, how can you kind of unlock some of those sort of layers of opportunity from maybe whether it's informal spaces, or I know you've got a number of those here as well, haven't you? Kind of how do you deal with a space that's got no windows, or how do you deal with a space that's not very well connected. All those kind of challenges that are really interesting, and often the things that kind of happen when cities kind of grow and develop is people find spaces, people take them over and occupy and create, and then, as you say, that allows that, you could say ecosystem if you want it to be a bit cliche, but that kind of like development up from different spaces into hopefully one day performing in the main theatre.
Yeah.
And so that is partly spatial, isn't it? It's partly programmatic as well. And as you say, some of those relationships with stakeholders, whether they're the council or whether they're local charities or local groups and schools, etc. So do you see that? Is that all part of your role? That kind of broader sort of networking remit about those connections, or is that sort of covered elsewhere within the team?
I think absolutely it should be fundamental to anybody working in a leadership position in a cultural organisation, to be honest. I think it's kind of, it's why we do what we do, and we should never just be responsible for our one place. I mean, it's always about sort of, I suppose, care for future generations, really. But of course, my colleagues as well, the other directors at the Barbican and around the city, I think everybody understands that as a fundamental to their remit. And I think you're right. I think it's about thinking in a really innovative way, I suppose, about what partnerships we foster. And it's not just actually charities, also like, we've got to be really smart about how we engage with commercial and corporate partners. How do we do that in a way that's true to our values, but also leverages the power they have? And it's not, I think people understand better now as well. It's not, we are not opposites. We are not mutually exclusive. It's not creative and commercial. Actually, the two absolutely and always have fed each other. That's how, it is how society works, how it is. And we both have a lot to offer in both directions, and actually how we can do that in a way that's really, really genuinely valuable and positive seems very significant, I think. Yeah. But your point around organic is interesting. You're quite right, because I think it's like you can dictate to a certain extent and kind of create the space, but you do need to let people discover it, and that kind of, it goes in phase, obviously, a kind of Hackney Dalston moment, which was kind of, I guess, my kind of coming of age bit, moving down to Peckham, and then, where next kind of thing. It's people slowly getting priced out of the city. So where does that go, and how can you help it? But how can you also just kind of sit back and enable it just to happen almost,
no, exactly. And that our work at Truman Brewery, that's been a lot centred around that, and that as a place has sort of managed to resist the waves of kind of pressure to force the creative industries out, and there's a lot of reasons for that, which won't go into today, but part of that is it being an anchor institution. Part of it is the way it's operated and the attitude towards that place, which, as you say, the spirit, if you want to use that term you used earlier. And part of it is a commercial thing. It's about how accessible you are, how whether you can give people free space, whether they can be flexible, how can you adjust to their needs. So maybe on that then, in terms of whether you want to call it the business model, or I don't know what you want to call it, the kind of economic model for the Barbican, obviously the housing looks after itself, etc. But the cultural spaces within the Barbican, how do you see that? And is that kind of something that you're focused on with the new project as well, whether it's revenue streams or access for talent or all those things we've talked about?
Yeah, it is actually fundamental to it. And interestingly, we've been working with the city because as part of this process, they've been really supporting us in developing our business planning. And we, like every other big arts organisation in the country, are subsidised. And it tends in most of these organisations to hover somewhere between 20 to 50% is support from either local authority or DCMS or Arts Council or wherever. The rest comes through revenue generation, either through ticketing or, commission from catering and retail and merchandising, and sponsorship and fundraising. And the balance of those things is different in every place that you work. But loosely, that tends to be the kind of where it falls out. And we're no different, really. We sit somewhere loosely within those sorts of percentages. What's interesting here that is a bit different is that we were always set up that way. Like, I think there was a better understanding from the start with the Barbican of what it meant to be a properly blended model. It was set up as the Barbican Arts and Conference Centre, not the Barbican Arts Centre, interesting to note. And the idea was that the conferences and the corporate hires and that sort of activity was basically underpinning paying for the arts. It was never expected that the arts would turn a profit. As it happens, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. You know what it's like, varied programme. But we also have, fantastic catering opportunities here, I think, and a really excellent, just going to say, shop. So retail for us, could be a huge kind of growth area. And it's not that, again, it's not the kind of, right, the commercial stuff happens over here and we just mine the money and pump it into the arts. Absolutely, they talk to each other. So, like the kitchen's the heart of the home. If your catering offer doesn't express the identity of place in the way that your arts program does, it never works. It's really important. Same with retail and the merchandising here. You come in and you can buy, we do, partnerships with, Rough Trade recently, that kind of thing. It's really kind of sophisticated, I would say, making sure that model works. And same with our commercial events. We want people coming in. So we're hosting, for example, the World Design Congress. Brilliant, because we have this opportunity now to do proper partnerships, talk to them about how we can display emerging designers alongside their activities, and it's a commercial thing, but it's also a kind of, shared values, shared interest thing. So I suppose it's that kind of really complex, actually, kind of networking together of all those different aspects of our operation. And I think we're particularly bloody good at it here, actually. I think it does it to itself. I think we will get better. I think that's where we're headed. So in looking at the buildings, actually, we're looking particularly at the catering areas. How can we make sure that they can sustain lots of different types of offer for different audiences, that sort of thing.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely fundamental, isn't it? And not just fundamental to the success of the Barbican as an entity, but to cities more broadly. That kind of idea of vibrancy, vitality, mixed use, different times of the day, different times of the week, for all is fundamental really to cities as these kind of engines of humanity, really. So, it's fascinating, and the whole emphasis around the destination city thing is to broaden, I think, the minds of people from, it's not just a centre for banking and commerce, it's a centre for lots of different things. And actually that's why the business wants to be here and people want to not work from home and come in, is because it's culturally rich, not as well as kind of the connections with their colleagues. So it all is a virtuous circle, it all kind of supports one another. And then maybe just to kind of end, Pip, I'm going to get, it's not in any way a narrow question, because it's a very big question. But everything we've talked about, everything from your roles in capital projects, working for those organisations we talked about, if you were now the developer of a mixed-use neighbourhood kind of place, the spirit of that place, what would that be? How would you kind of contextualise that if we're getting off an elevator in the next 2 minutes?
Oh my God, spirit of place, optimism. I don't know. I mean, I think creating somewhere, I'm really interested in informality. I don't like to dictate behaviours, right? So I do think, how do you create a place where people will come and shape it themselves, I guess. So places of encounter, I'm really interested in that, and that's always been a bit of a leading kind of mission of mine, I guess. Oh gosh, yeah, that is quite an enormous question, and variety. I think that's the other thing. So actually, how you value different types of activities. So really interesting conversations recently with colleagues in our sports department, and actually often arts and sports seen separately. It's like, well, surely most of us enjoy both at some point in some way, right? So something about that sort of, we have this kind of odd intellectual value system about which activities are worthwhile and which are just leisure, I love the idea of a better understanding of the fluidity of all of that and the sort of generative nature of informal behaviours. Is that good?
Awesome.
Is that all right?
No, that was awesome. That was really good. It was really good. And I think so apt for everything we've talked about today, and also the future that we're in now, particularly around an ever advancing kind of digital age and kind of the role of cities, the role of what people do, how we spend our time is exactly as you've just described there. So I think that informality, that ability to adapt, to change, to value the intangible as well as the tangible is essential, really, go forward. So I think that's an awesome way to end, Pip, and thank you again for your time today.
Oh, thank you. It's been fantastic.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to the Grow Places podcast. For more information, visit growplaces.com. And follow us at We Grow Places across all social channels. See you next time.